Secret Diary. I'm your host, Arianna Ayala. Secret Diary is a podcast dedicated to discussing our experiences of the modern work environment across various sectors. Join me as I dive into insightful analysis and firsthand accounts of industry dynamics. My goal is to empower you to question conventional norms and actively participate in shaping inclusive and progressive work cultures. Today's episode is going to be more of an unstructured deep dive into kind of what got me into organizing and kind of my hopes and dreams for this passion project that is Secret Diary, which I hope one day to be a dedicated community forum and just like an open conversation to empower and challenge these kinds of topics that we'll be covering. But a little bit about me is I am a full-time graphic design student, and I'm set to graduate next spring. I'm also a full-time barista and steward, and one of the founders from my cafe's labor union. We won our election in May of 2022 and have gained an agreement from the company to begin bargaining, and we're currently in that process. It's been a lot of work to get to this point, both physically and emotionally. And I wanted to give you guys a chance to understand my passions and my dedication to the relationship between worker and employer. So here's some of my circumstances and like the background of me, who I am as the host. And I do want to give a small disclaimer that while I'm going to do a bit of a deep dive into my personal journey and connecting social justice to that, the following episodes for this podcast will be less about my personal experience and more about sharing that space with others to dig into the experiences. So I'm super excited to have guests on the show. I already have a few lined up. And I just wanted to make it clear that this podcast will be anything but formal. My goal is to follow a format for open discussions and kind of allow guests and myself to personalize these movements more, so you as an audience member can feel connected to these conversations and perhaps stand to radicalize yourself and a few more future leaders. So without further ado, let's jump in. I was born and raised in South Florida by my Salvadorian parents, fleeing the catastrophe that was the Salvadorian Civil War, which I hope to cover in its own episode with my parents one day. But for the sake of storytelling, my mom immigrated to downtown Los Angeles in the 90s when she was just 15 years old. She spent the first year of her life learning English, adapting to American culture, and hopping around with my grandma and my aunts and uncles, her 4 siblings, trying to make this chase for an American dream work. She graduated with high honors, and she was, in every sense of the word, a prom queen. And in kind of stark contrast, my dad was set up in Florida in, I believe, 1996 with his siblings, and he's the youngest of 5. So definitely kind of different environments that my parents were brought into the United States by, but he landed in Florida and began working in carpentry during this brief 2 to 3 distance. They exchanged letters and pager notices up until they got married and moved to Florida to start their family in 1998. So my parents' immigration story is one I would hear about in slow moving pieces as I grew up. They instilled a lot of pride of my identity as first generation and never let me lose sight of the reality of hard work and class consciousness. And it took like me consistently pedaling through my studies and potential success, and my parents supporting me through this to really understand where I was in this system and under the guise of what are the optics of me being successful? What are the chances when I come face to face with the reality of a workforce or higher education? What are those communities? What do these environments look like for people like me? And I don't think my parents realized the large chunk of my radicalization began with the experience of being raised in a hardline red state. And I was kind of being raised in a community where I got to watch like the rise of these working class immigrants, people that like I connected to in a familial structure, but I was also, going to school and getting my education in what was considered like a predominantly white professional American community. And I really had to navigate my privileges as an American citizen with the limitations of my parents being sold on an American dream that was, in short, systemically rigged against us. When I kind of look back and what this looked like for me, like a younger me, it was like working as a translator and being a mediator for conversations between my parents and professionals at a young age. Well, thankfully, my parents' English was always understandable and eventually fluent. I realized much later that there was like this contextual development that had never integrated itself into their English. My mom really struggled to understand the flow of long-winded conversations, and we were often stuck in a whirlwind of miscommunication because there were just things that were difficult for her to understand, like the way I was saying things in English and the way I was communicating. And I really struggled to just like adapt to speaking to my parents in Spanish at home after being like mostly around English speaking people in school and at work and at events. And it definitely shaped this view of the world I had, where I felt like I was in between these like two different forms of culture and communication. Another example of my radicalization, and something that's like a little bit harder for me to like dig into without feeling like I'm stepping on eggshells, was being raised in the evangelical church. I was intermittently committed to my role in the church for about all 18 years of my life. I would say like it rose and it peaked at 14. And this was like the height of my journey. I was singing in the youth band. I was going to dance practice for the dance group. I went to discipleship classes, and I would help go to conferences and plan and execute mission trips. It was literally my entire life. Like I was there like 3 times a week, 4 times a week, consistently from the ages of 13, 14 up until I was 18 years old. And it's not a secret that in these, religious environments, sometimes there's this culture of like a lack of transparency and kind of this pressure to conform to the structures that are being put in place, something that I really felt conflicted with when I was kind of going back and forth between what I wanted for myself, but what was being modeled to me, like at church, was that there was like these ideas of what it was to be successful. And a lot of it is like, one of being a believer, for like believing that God will pave this way and these blessings will be fruitful to you. And I don't want to get too much into like all of it, because it would be such a blanket statement for me to say that it was just like an isolating experience and that I was like falling into a cycle between like sins, forgiveness, sacrificing blessings. My parents always supported me in these commitments, so it definitely was like something that I was kind of putting myself through to kind of feel established and to feel like I was searching for my own truth. And even when it felt like my parents were being judged for like the very real and common struggles of assimilation and having children at a young age, there's like this ideology upheld by the church, this idea that we must submit to the rules and authority in place for as it is written. And I could just never really get around that. I don't shame religion. I just don't follow it in any organized fashion. But I think like this experience in itself is what led me to really question the structures we have in place and just kind of accepting things as they are and not questioning them outside of like how it is affecting the people and the bodies of people that are coming together to uphold this system. Like, how are they being affected? What do they feel interpersonally between themselves? What are things that they're afraid to say in fear of being shamed or judged? Despite all this, I was met with a lot of compassion in the church, and I met some of the kindest, most passionate people. They were inspiring, and they encouraged me to pursue my truth. And the best way I can describe my experience was just looking for answers in the wrong places. I was naturally curious and conflicted with the lessons I was being taught, and coming face to face with some form of reality. Like, if you wanted to change the culture, if you were really kind of wanting to connect with people who were struggling and weren't afraid to be honest without jumping into like scripture or, you know, I just feel like as an adolescent, I really wanted a true community, and I felt like I desperately needed that because of just like things that were going on as I grew up and in my childhood. And I realized that I needed to be one with the world and not look for reasons to pride myself against it. Like, I, at some point, just felt like I needed to accept the fact that, like, this is our earth, this is life, and not to get too spiritual. I just think I landed myself outside of what I can best describe as like a fishbowl. And the church was just like sitting right in the middle of it. Schools of fishes flocking in and out. And I think I'll always stop to stare a bit when I reflect deeply. I imagine like fishing my hand back inside and attempting to save a few people out of from toxic environments. And I just think that that's something that's always followed me from my experience growing up in the church, and could totally go into more details on that. But for the sake of the episode, for the sake of like really wanting to dig into all parts of myself, I think we'll end it there. But another kind of pillar of my radicalization, and I feel like one that I want to stay a little longer and marinate through, is what I can best describe as like the pride I have of being a sibling and a friend. The first two environments I kind of spoke about were kind of environments I had to accept and adapt to. Being a sister, a best friend, those are roles I took a lot of pride in, and I still do. I feel like immensely connected to the sanctuary within my siblings, like my older brother, my younger brother, and the things that they provided for me. Raising a sibling like your own, like me and my younger brother are, I feel like twins, just born at different points of time. And I just think it really changes the way you see the world. You question the pain and the circumstances that are inflicted upon you, and you ask yourself, like, why is this okay? How is this okay? These were just questions that followed me everywhere. They shaped me into noticing patterns of injustice that I was facing, that my peers were facing. I feel like my background, my family history, they were all dominoes, like slowly lining up for me until I gained the courage to look back and think about where I could take this curiosity and natural defiance. I think in order to get like the full scope of the head of, you know, kind of like why I'm starting this podcast, why I'm getting into Secret Diary, why I want this to, you know, be a community for myself and others, is kind of needs to be circled in on a specific period of time of my life. So I want to kind of go into what it was like being a senior in high school, and being first generation. My older brother did end up going away to the Marine Corps, and he dropped out of school like a year in or a few semesters in. He had a really hard time with the FAFSA and just college apps. He went to like community college for a few weeks, and up until that point, like, he was really determined to be recruited for soccer. And there was just like, my parents didn't really understand the process of college, and my brother didn't really like know the resources that we had. And by the time it was my turn and I was a senior in high school and I needed to decide where I would end up for the next 4 years, I had wanted to be like the dream that my parents bet on when I was just 15 years old. I skipped my quinceañera and I went straight to New York for like a week, and I was just so like ecstatic. I was surrounded by so much art and music and people who looked like me, and I felt inspired. And I spent like all of high school telling my parents that I was going to go to school one day in New York. And so here I am in my senior year. I'm sitting in the guidance counselor's office. The counselor's going over my grades. She's impressed, but she's like not much help. she asked what schools I want to apply to, and I let her know my choices that I had just like fished around for like best schools in New York and some in Florida because I didn't want to like not have a backup plan. We walked through it. She just like pointed me to the college app portal and told me to get to go. Like she's like, go back to class, you know. I went to a pretty shit public high school. Like it had one decent program that I was not interested in doing, just like me being rebellious and feeling too stressed about like my home environment and the responsibilities I had at church. It just like too much for me to not want. Like school was a easy place for me to be, and a lot of like low effort but like learning, and I loved learning, but I just didn't want like to feel this weight of responsibility that it took to be in like a big program. This is also like my idea of defying the education system and its lack of inclusiveness. Like most of my peers and the people I was in class with, because it was a public high school, they were really struggling. They were not given a sliver of a chance the way that more applied, quote unquote, program kids were. So unsurprisingly, I got waitlisted at just about every school I applied to. And then I got into like one or two big dreamy New York schools that like in retrospect, like way too expensive. They did not offer me like any decent scholarships, but also like I wasn't really given any resources. I didn't really know how to go out and taste those ambitions that I had. I just never had the support for it in any like tangible way. I took basically, I had worked a part-time job that offered up a free bachelor's program, and I signed up for it. I just committed to myself, like, I'm gonna do this for the next 4 years, and I'm gonna move anyway, and I'm just gonna, chase these ambitions in my own way, kind of working in a less conventional, like, traditional way. So now it was like the fall and August of my freshman year of college. I was working full time in school full time. I was living on my own in New York where I knew no one. And the only ideas of the city I had were like the romanticized ideas of it that were conjured up in like the safety of my childhood bedroom for the past 4 years. I had no idea what it was like to live in the real world. It took all of 7 months before I was like fed up working my barista gig, barely able to break even. I was eating ramen and raviolis for dinner and breakfast. I was like too afraid to like tell my parents how much I was really struggling to adapt. And my only friends were my coworkers, who were also drained and tired and fed up. And I remember my then coworker, my dear friend Gabe, making a joke about unionizing our store. And organizing them, like a similar store for the company I worked for had done up in Buffalo, and joked back that if he could get enough people on board, I'd send the email to the union org, and that would help unionize our store. And about 5 days later, we're all signing, we're all so hyped, and we're filing for an election. And just like looking back at it now, I'm really proud of 19-year-old me. I just feel like I was like this overtly ambitious person who felt like, of course, let's do this. I had absolutely not a single clue about the work that was to come to keep this pushing the momentum for this building. But I'm at the same time thankful for my naivety every day. I've watched our movement unfold and really turn the tides on a toxic work environment across various sectors. It's not something I would have considered for myself in an executed plan. It was like the first time I had realized the privilege I did have amidst like all the difficulties of chasing some tired American dream. My experiences and my struggles had really felt built into who I was, and it altered like the way I wanted to chase like the top of this mountain that we were being sold, like this, following in on this rat race, like forcing it onward, when I just was like, oh, you don't have to accept this. Like nothing better for the greater good ever came from being obedient and submissive to an authoritarian regime, like not in any long run. So like brewing and all of this, and it's been 2 years since I organized my store, and at this point like we're making momentum with this movement, and I just had this seed of hope for Secret Diary. um Actually for like a little bit was just like blogging to myself and kind of using it as an introspection for myself. I even have like really old clips of me like talking to my camera on my webcam, just like venting and letting it all out because it's hard work. And sometimes I feel like we don't give ourselves enough credit when we're like chasing so many different aspirations at once, you know, like I really wanted Secret Diary for myself, and then I started organizing more, and I started, really hunkering in on kind of the wins that I wanted to see and the visibility for this movement. And I was like, you need to bring more people in. You need to like tap into these communities. You aren't alone. You don't need to feel isolated in your experiences. And you can really take the things that you feel and your struggles and the what ifs of your life, and you can really dream about the world you want to live in and find others that, they want to do the same. And I'm really excited, and I'm also like, don't want to have any expectations at all. It's really like this fun dance I've been giving myself where I'm kind of just like ebbing and flowing. I've kind of gotten to a place in my life, and I'm about to graduate next year, and I'm just kind of contemplating and sitting on these ideas of like, what do I want, and who do I want to be, and for who, and for when. And I just feel like Secret Diary is very personal and very passion filled, and I want to give it to others, and I want to open that space. Just feels like very tangible to me, and it feels like very true in nature to my aspirations and my goals. I had a really hard time thinking about getting on here and kind of recording myself and making like myself a face of this project, but I don't know, it's gotten to a point where it no longer feels like it's just about me. It just feels so much bigger than me. It feels like it's growing its own mind, and I'm just here to kind of guide it and pioneer it in any way that I can. But at the end of the day, like, I really want to see this podcast take its own form for other people, and I really want to kind of just like a gift to the world. Like, here you are, here are other people who are probably thinking the same things, struggling in the same ways. And I know we didn't get too much into that specifically in this episode. I really did want to give you guys like an opportunity to get to know me on a little bit of a more personal and deeper level. So when we are on here with guests and I am hosting a little bit more, you're able to kind of know where I'm coming from. That even if, you can't like fully agree with me or see things the way that I see them, that you can, kind of shape it around my experiences and, who I am as a person and like the guests. I think that's what it is, just like personalizing things, because we all have such unique experiences and opinions, and I don't think any of them are ever like wrong inherently at all. I think it's like having the space to share what you think, and you never know like what comes from having so many different ideas shared and collected. It can really transcend and take something that we've all been stumped on, like historically, and that we've all kind of like been collectively building up to in our own ways and from our own unique ideas, and finally applying it to something and, creating something great from it. So yeah, I just am so happy to have shared some time with you, some space. I'm a little exhausted from a busy week because it certainly has been really busy at the shop. And I kind of spent my first 2 weeks of summer break from school really digging into more organizing efforts. So it's time to just settle in a little bit, do some self-care, really like listen to my body and my mind, reach out to my friends a little bit more. I think sometimes when you care a lot about a different variety of things and you put like a lot of your eggs in different baskets, it's okay to ask to hold your eggs for a little bit before you throw them back in, you know. I probably if I ever get the chance to meet any of you in person, please know, like, I want to know so much about you and your experiences and your struggles, and if there's like any way that you can find an outlet and a medium or just like the courage to share the things that you're going through and to confide in people, that for me that will be like such a great win and such a great accomplishment, to just instill more confidence in people and let them know that it's okay to feel the way that you feel. It's okay to be frustrated. It's okay to feel kind of shaken up and like you have no idea where to start. Start by listening to yourself. Start by advocating for yourself and showing up for yourself and being unafraid to, you know, share what it is that you're dealing with and struggling with. That's like where the empowerment comes from, is identifying this, like, you are allowed to be selfish and entitled. I don't care what the older generations like to say about the younger ones. The sense of entitlement that like is used against us, I think it's very telling and shaping of the way this world is growing and can grow for the better, is we can just begin to acknowledge that we deserve things, even if somebody else might feel, because, you know, they went their lives and they didn't have this and they turned out just fine, that you can't advocate for differences in your experiences, and you can't come forward and share what would make it better for you, because it's your life. You can take control of it in that way. And not to get too motivational speaker on you, I am also just like super into being mindful and showing up for others. Just like unconditional love is one of my biggest goals in life to achieve, is like to be a pillar of unconditional love for others. Very tricky thing to follow through life, I know, but it really is something just like this podcast that I feel really called to, and I hope to share like a bunch of other ambitions slowly and but surely with our time together. And I don't think I'm gonna press too hard to push this video more than it already has gone. So if you've watched this far and you've come this far, I did have a little outro written. Let me see if I can pull it up. All right, bear with me now. Bear with me now. Okay. Follow Secret Diary .socials on Instagram, and I think we might be on Twitter/X. I'm debating the way I'll be posting on there, but definitely check it out. I also want to plug that I will be shaping a website, and I've been working on editing the digital scrapbook/digital diary that will be accompanying each of these episodes. Probably aiming to do the digital diary a little less frequently than the episodes, just because it'll take me a little bit longer to go through those, because I do design and edit them all myself. Recording's a little bit of an easier process for me than that is, and given the time constraints, on the things that I have going on right now. But despite all this, I still hope to sit down with you guys and some guests, introduce you to some more like-minded individuals, and yeah, enjoy the rest of your May Day March. Um, let's chat soon. All right. Thank you guys so much for watching. I was your host, Arianna Ayala, and this was Secret Diary. Goodbye.